everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'd finally like to get to recommend some summer reading. I've always wanted to make one of these seasonal recommendations, and I tend to hate summer, but I've accumulated a few books that remind me of summer, and there are some books that I read personally in the summer. But what I would also like to do is, in this process of recommending summer books, to also pair them with non-fiction books that might interest you. Some of them will even be kind of movies or TV shows or little quirky things. Some of them have more than one non-fiction pairing book. But I hope you will enjoy this video and get some cool reading recommendations. Again, these are mostly classics or modern classics. And most of the modern classics, I think, are Nobel Prize winners, so I think they're considered classics. All right, so we're gonna start off with one of those, which is Hermann Hesse's The Glass Bead Game. This is also published as Magister Ludi. This book used to be my favorite book of all times before I discovered Halldór Laxness, the Icelandic Nobel Prize winner. This book is set in the future, and we have a community that is both scholarly and monastic at the same time. While it is an all-boys school, this place not only teaches students like high intellectual things, combines it with a sort of meditation. Like meditation and spirituality is sort of implemented into their studies in a way that's very wholesome. And we also have this kind of glass bead game, which is this very esoteric, cool thing that's both academic and spiritual at the same time. And we follow Joseph through his entire life. It's also kind of a Bildungsroman that way. But one of the things that I love is that you have this kind of adversarial relationship between him and a boy at the school. And when they kind of peak in adulthood, they split up, and this person stays in this meditative community at Castilia, and the other person goes out in the world and does things or has influence on people. And you get to see their interactions throughout their life and how each one views the other and considers what is worth doing in life and what is worth living for. There's a lot in this book to think about. It is a bit thick. I mean, I think when I read this, it took me the entire summer. But it is worth reading, and it is something, there's something summer about it because it's kind of this isolated place up in the mountains, and it is a monastic feeling. Definitely, I would recommend this book a lot. And if I were to pair this with a book, I was thinking to either pair it with something like Wherever You Go, There You Are, because it's an introduction to meditation. But I do think a good pairing for this book is Thich Nhat Hanh's How to Find Joy and Meaning in Each Hour of the Day, and this book is called Work. So it's basically how to find ways to meditate and be happy when you are at work, whatever your work might be, or something that you view as work, where it's not something you necessarily want to do, or somewhere where you feel sort of trapped. How to make the most of a moment where you feel constrained, or just something you're resisting in your heart, and to find a way out via meditation. And it takes you through methods. It's beautiful language, but it does talk a lot about meditation and Zen Buddhism. I remember reading this in one day, and I was so pumped, and I took so many notes, and I was so excited. But later that day, my apartment flooded and I got COVID at the same time, and I just now associated with that. But in the morning of that day, I had a great time, and I really, really think this is worth contemplating, or at least pairing it with the other book. So let's talk pirates. Obviously, Treasure Island is an ultimate classic, especially if you like pirates and piracy and things out at sea. I think everyone knows this book, but it is just such a cozy place to go to in the summer. There's something about the heat that just makes you want to go out at sea. Since this is a children's classic and it is kind of an introduction to pirates, it is also responsible for a lot of the stereotypes that have to do with pirates. So if I were to pair this with another book, I would pair it with Rebecca Simon's book, Why We Love Pirates. While that book primarily focuses on Captain Kidd and his capturing, in the introduction, or the first half of the book, she kind of starts to introduce you to the world of real historical pirates and debunk a lot of myths started by this book or assumptions made about pirates because of this book or its popularity. And it also introduces you to real life piracy and real life concepts, and It's an easy way into pirate nonfiction in a way that like both explains it to you like you're 5, but at the same time packed full of fun facts, and it's very interesting, and it's a great introduction. Now, if you are a bit more grown-up pirate and you'd like to read a fiction work that's also a classic, I would recommend Sabatini's Captain Blood. I do have a very old copy, but I can put a newer copy on the screen. This book follows a physician, and this physician is fighting on behalf of a war on one side, and usually doctors have the Hippocratic Oath, which says, no matter what happens, I will view someone's life as sacred first, and I will heal first. I don't care about politics. And in this fight, he helps somebody on the other side to heal, even though they're technically at war. So then he's kind of on trial from his own side because he helped the other side, because he's a doctor. So he gets extremely radicalized and becomes a pirate. And I think this is a lot closer to how people were converted into piracy. A lot of them were actual sailors or people who fought for the crown and got radicalized over certain conditions that were very harsh out at sea. Pirates, in their kind of weirdness, have also sort of started a very contemporary democracy. There's voting, there's equality, there's sharing of what is looted. There's a lot of concepts in early piracy that are more advanced than what actual society was like. And I think that's kind of impressive. So while in Pirates of the Caribbean, Tortuga is displaced for pirates, in real life, Tortuga was on the side of Haiti. But in real life, historically, there was a Republic of Pirates in Nassau, in the Bahamas. And there is a book about this specifically. There are several, and if you want to know more about those, I have a whole pirate syllabus. But in the Republic of Pirates, we do follow specifically those 11 years in Nassau when it was entirely run by pirates and there was no crown or other kind of leadership beyond the pirates for those concentrated 11 years. I think both of these are kind of like a more grown-up version of pirate history. As a bonus, if you do like all of this and you'd like a combination of the Republic of Pirates and Treasure Island, so like the non-fiction of the Republic of Pirates and the fictional components of Treasure Island, you might really enjoy the TV show Black Sails, which is very serious, very HBO style. It is a grown-up adult show, but it does combine these two elements, and it really plays with fiction and non-fiction in a really cool way. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. And speaking of Out at Sea, a good classic for the summer is definitely Moby Dick. We follow Ishmael. He goes out at sea under the rule of this Captain Ahab, and they're out to get a whale. And the cool thing about it is the way it interacts with the sea, the many metaphors and allusions to other literary figures, to other non-fiction books of the time. But recently I've read this book called Ahab's Rolling Sea, and this is a non-fiction book written by Richard J. King, following Moby Dick kind of step by step, but every time there's an element of natural history in there, or something to do with whales or the albatross, or references to sailors, or references to, the whale ship Essex and the real historical things that had inspired Moby Dick in the first place. While you do get a lot of literary references, and it's really cool for people who love literature, it is primarily drawing you into natural history and showing you all of the natural elements in Moby Dick and telling you a little bit about them so that you can have it as like a collab with Moby Dick, and it makes it a lot more fun. I really love this book. Honestly, I think I enjoyed reading this book a little bit more than I enjoyed Moby Dick in the first place. And that's a pretty high praise, I think. And since we're on the sea topic, this is gonna be a bit of a stretch, but if you really enjoyed season 3 of Bridgerton, and you were particularly drawn to the naturalist Lord Debling, and you were really interested about his attempts to save the Great Auk, and you're wondering what that's all about, boy do I have books for you. So I've been reading The Seabird's Cry, which is a book about 10 seabirds, and one of them is the Great Auk, and Audubon at Sea. This is more of a biography of John James Audubon, the man who did Birds of America, and it is mostly about him, but it's the seabirds featured in Audubon. And again, this starts off with the tragedy of the great auk. And I had no idea that the great auk was not only on the verge of extinction, but people went specifically to this little island off the coast of Iceland where they knew the last great auks were living and strangled them. They went extinct, and we know who made them go extinct in 1844. June 3rd, not that it matters. Learning about seabirds and the great auk has been a lot of fun. I'm personally trying to do a little bit like of natural history, nature journaling. I'm currently drawing a lot of puffins and blue-footed boobies and the albatross. I really like drawing and combining it with learning about natural history. But I found these two books to be spectacular. So now let's step away a bit from the sea. Well, not really. We're close to the sea. We're on the coast, okay? So we're gonna talk about The Awakening by Kate Chopin. This is a great summer classic. I read this, I think, in 2 days, and it's one of those books where while you're in it, there's something very serious and somber, and it's kind of difficult to push through. But the moment you finish it, you can't stop thinking about it. You want to discuss it. It becomes more and more interesting the more you think about it. Here we follow Edna Pontellier, who is married to this man who's always away from her. She has a very complicated marriage. She lives in New Orleans, and there's also a kind of French Creole community. You get kind of the spirit of New Orleans in here, and there's a lot of kind of difficulty with both her marriage and children. It is almost like the American feminist rewriting of something like Madame Bovary and Anna Karenina. And you do have a very tragic ending, but she's always out by the sea with her children. There's a lot of community. The thing feels hot. Everything about this is sort of summer hot. Both in terms of the anger and the blood boiling inside of you as you're reading this, but also the way it's written, the elements, the setting, everything is summer. And it's kind of a hybrid of like a summer dark reading, but it's also by the sea. So yeah, definitely a good classic to read in the summer for sure. Now I would pair this up because of its themes of motherhood, a lot of its concepts with matrescence. This is a newly published book written by Lucy Jones, and I think it is extraordinary and it should be required reading, especially in high school. Instead of giving kids like a pack of flour to take care of or some eggs, just make them read this book. It's so good because it covers both the sort of biological and physical things that happen to a woman through pregnancy from conception to postpartum. The postpartum period can take up to 2 years for a woman to fully rehabilitate back into her old self, and even then her body will never be the same. There are a lot of concepts in there that are also not just biological but social, like the social expectations of you, the way people talk to you before and after birth, the village that doesn't exist, the way our society is set up to not support women in any way, even after they pressure them to have children. There's a lot in there that I think paired up with this book will make you not only really feel for Edna in many, many ways, but it will make you angry for women of the past. It will just bring up feelings inside of you that are wonderful, chaotic, and obviously feminist at its core, but just beautiful all around. I think it's a great pairing. So another book that I've read that I loved, and it was kind of set in the summer, was Main Street by Sinclair Lewis, the librarian book. Here we follow Carol, who is a very wealthy woman. She's well off. She got educated. She went to library school in Chicago, and this is back in like the library's early days. Back then, a lot of women were required to have like under their belt a lot of knowledge, including like knowing 7 languages. There was a lot going on. It was also the time of the Carnegie Library. So when Andrew Carnegie, the philanthropist, invested millions of dollars in libraries being built all over the country, there was a lot of kind of community building things, but it was also kind of, to librarians at least, it was told that it was their higher purpose. Saint-like figures who were supposed to help the poor, the communities, and they were doing charity work. In Main Street, Carol, who is well off and does all these things, gets married to a small town kind of boy who is a doctor. So they go to this town, and while she is wealthy and affluent and has all this education under her belt, and her husband is the town doctor. She wants to start this library there and provide a community service, but she has this kind of conflict with the small town life. One concept in this book that I never knew about was the treatment of Norwegian and Swedish people in America at the time. Like, I had no idea of the dynamics between the Scandinavian people in North America, so that was kind of a shock to me. I've also heard the term in this book called Swedish and Norwegian patois, which I didn't even know was a thing. Like, I'm sure there's more to unpack in this book and discuss, but I do think it's interesting to highlight a very specific part of librarianship history through the eyes of a character and through the eyes of a very privileged character. So it is a playful book. It is satirical in its many ways. But if I were to pair this up, I would actually have 3 books for you. So the first book is Apostles of Culture, which I've spoken about before, but this is a very difficult book to find. It is out of print, but it talks about the history of librarianship, particularly that thing I was talking about earlier, where they were viewed as like apostles of culture. Like, there was something sort of spiritual tied into the idea of being a librarian, like a charity work kind of thing, in addition to the academics, which later got integrated into the librarianship concept. But you do kind of go through its history, and it kind of stops around the 80s. Now, the second book is particularly tied to Main Street, and it is written by a librarianship historian who has written another book called Part of Our World, I think. I read that one as well, but this one is called Main Street, and it engages with the novel a little bit, and it draws on real life consequences or real life historical bits about librarianship history. But if you're looking for the contemporary version of all of that, I would recommend Places for the People by Eric Kleinenberg. How social infrastructure can help fight inequality, polarization, and the decline of civic life. I think lately there's been a rise in demand, especially by the younger generations in a post-COVID world, to want a third space, to want libraries to provide more communal opportunities. And this book looks a lot at things like community centers and libraries and its function in our contemporary society in the age of the internet. It engages with a lot more contemporary themes, and I think if you're a person who works in community service, if you are a librarian, or if you really like the idea of public service or social work, this might be a really great book for you. I know there's a temptation to always recommend Anne of Green Gables in the summer because it is such a summer book. Everything about Anne is just so green and screams summer. But when I grew up, I didn't have Anne of Green Gables. I had Heidi, and she is a little girl who lives in the Alps with her grandfather, and there's a lot of animals and really cutesy things, and I think to me it's just kind of like so wholesome and the spirit of childhood, and I love her very much. And if you like the spirit of childhood and you want to engage with literary works that are about children or about children's literature, and to talk about this essence of childhood in books in a smart, educated way, I would always recommend Enchanted Hunters, The Power of Stories in Childhood by Maria Tatar. So she is a PhD at Harvard who taught folklore and the Brothers Grimm. She translated some works. She wrote several books and annotated several children's works, but in this book, it's a comprehensive history of children's literature. The way she writes is beautiful. She even looks at some paintings of people telling stories around the hearth, from older people to slowly progressive into the bedrooms of children with like slightly older children telling younger children's stories. All of the children's classics tied into this book and their social effects afterwards. It's so beautiful, and it just captures that spirit, but also kind of with adult eyes. You know, I think sometimes we do have foggy rose-colored glasses when we look back on our childhood, and we think that because we were children, we thought in a very sweet and cutesy and innocent way. The reality is that when you were a child, you were probably playing some pretty morbid, creepy games and pretending to be an adult. Speaking of idealized childhood, so Ray Bradbury wrote a trilogy. This is the first in it that I really love. It's called Dandelion Wine, and it's about his memories as a child. It is fictionalized, but it's so sweet and cute, and it's about this very small town in America. And I was thinking what to pair this up with, but I think because it is Ray Bradbury, I would tie it back to him. So reading something like The Last Interview book with Ray Bradbury, both of them so short, so sweet, you can probably read both of them in the same day. But The Last Interview with Ray Bradbury has so many highlightable things. I think my entire Last Interview book, which I don't have on me, is highlighted and annotated and has so many flags in it because he speaks so beautifully and highly of literature, of libraries. He never got a chance to go to college, and he wanted a higher education but couldn't afford it. And he spent most of his life in libraries, just teaching himself, reading, learning for fun, and writing in those spaces. And for him, the library is everything. And I think it ties back to the librarianship we were talking about earlier. But a third thing I'll recommend for Ray Bradbury is something that ties back into Moby Dick, is that Ray Bradbury was called upon to help write the script for Moby Dick, the movie, back in the day. And he wrote a book about this experience, and I would recommend the audiobook for this. Now, a book that I've read in the summer, and again, this was one of those tomes that took me the entire summer, was Anna Karenina. This was my first book that I read that tipped me into the world of becoming a reader. And while Russian classics are mostly set in the winter, and a lot of Anna Karenina is as well, there are interspersed chapters where we talk about the workers, the serfs in the field, and there is something summer about those scenes, particularly the parties and the scenes with the poor folk in juxtaposition to the very wealthy people who are the main characters of this novel. So I would say that there are parts of Anna Karenina that are summer-ish, but I think this is more, for me at least, the book reminds me of summer because of when I read it. If you want something sort of playful with Russian literature, I would recommend The Possessed by Elif Bachman. She's the author of Either Or and The Idiot. In this work, which is a nonfiction memoir sort of, but it also engages with Russian literature, she talks to you about her experience, just diving deep into Russian lit and traveling, and it's so funny and morbid at times, but also kind of playful. But I think it's the closest we're ever gonna get to a summery, happy feeling book related to Russian literature. And the second book is A Swim in the Rain and the Pond by George Saunders. This is writing advice plus nonfiction plus close reading of 7 Russian short stories, some of which take place in the summer. But, you know, it is mostly academic, so this is kind of like an academia book, I guess, or a writing advice book. But it's the most beautiful book you will ever read, and I highly, highly recommend the audiobook as well, because it has some great actors and George Saunders as well. And another book that screams summer is kind of Peter Rabbit, anything to do with Beatrix Potter. But since you're an adult, you probably want to read nonfiction that's for adults. So here's where I would recommend Over the Hills and Far Away, the biography of Beatrix Potter, which took place outside a lot, and she has great contributions to science and natural history. But there's also a book series called The Gardening Life, and Beatrix Potter's Gardening Life is a great book for that. There's also The Secret Garden, or a close reading of The Secret Garden through the lens of gardening. Another one is the Little House in the Prairie books, which I have not read, but I know it exists. But one that I did read was Emily Dickinson's Gardening Life. So if you like that kind of gardening style life mixed with literary figures and their biography, you might really like this series. And lastly, I'm going to mention 2 books which kind of straddle the line of fiction and nonfiction, but they're both classics and it's something you might really enjoy. So the first is Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. I know, Steinbeck, because his setting is usually in California, everything about his books, like East of Eden and Mice and Men, just make me feel sticky, like I need air conditioning. It's the same with Mark Twain and like Huckleberry Finn. Like the moment I start reading those books, like I want air conditioning right now. But Steinbeck's book that I think would be fun and light, but also kind of exciting and a bit dabbling in politics and a bit kind of nonfiction and a bit fiction is Travels with Charlie, where he gets a van, he names it Rocinante after Don Quixote's horse, and goes out to go all across the states with his dog Charlie. It is such a man-dog book and a traveling story It engages with the politics of the time. It was an election year, much like this one. But the reason I say that it's somewhat fiction is because, again, it's one person's perspective of his own life. So there are not facts or fact checking. No one is there to fact check him. There is a person who's out there and has actually fact checked that a lot of the writing in this hasn't happened, or he really exaggerated, but it doesn't matter. Whether it's fiction or fact, it doesn't matter. It's the way that it is written and the ideas in it that are important, and it's beautiful, and it's such an early like travel book. And another book that I will always recommend and does straddle this line as well is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. I went to see Walden Pond in the summer. Walden to me is a summer book, but he did stay there for 2 years, and that included the winter days where it was cold and he didn't have food and he couldn't go for a swim. So there was a little bit of a balance with the seasons in this one. But again, it's from his own perspective. There's no one fact checking him. Are there elements of fiction in there? Sure, especially in the way he writes. That's kind of straddling that line of fiction and nonfiction. But I think these two books are definitely ones you want to have read because they're great classics. End it here because I could go on all day, but my camera is dying and I need to wrap this up. So please let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these, if you want to read them, but also if you have any summer reading recommendations, do let me know down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!